Here's a truth that will unsettle you. You are always getting exactly what you want. Not what you think you want, not what you say you want, but what you actually want at the deepest, most unconscious level of your being. Everything that comes to you is a reflection of what goes out from you. Every circumstance, every relationship, every outcome, it's all returning to you like an echo. And I know what you're thinking, that's absurd. I didn't want this struggle, I didn't want this pain, I didn't ask for this. But that's only absurd if you define yourself as nothing more than your conscious, voluntary thoughts, the little voice in your head that narrates your day and makes your plans. That definition is laughably incomplete, because you are far more than that voice. You are the conscious and the unconscious. You are the self and the environment. You are the inside and the outside. And these two are not separate. They move together like the two sides of a snake as it swims through water. When you see this, when you feel this, a strange sensation arises. A realization that the boundary between you and the world was always an illusion. But here's the danger. If you come from a Western background, if you've been raised to believe in the isolated ego, this realization can inflate you. You might think, I am God, I am in control of all this. And suddenly your ego doesn't dissolve, it expands, it becomes megalomaniacal. You become one of those holier-than-thou types who think they're above all human conventions, who have no obligations to anyone because they're divine. But that's missing the point entirely. Doing as you will is not a new behavior you suddenly adopt. It's what you've always been doing, you just didn't realize it. Stay with me. This gets deeper. Let's start with a simple observation. You've been told your whole life that sometimes you have to do things you don't want to do. Your mother probably said it. Your teachers said it. Society says it constantly. Sometimes we have to do things we don't like. But let's examine that. When a child obeys their mother and does something they don't want to do, why do they do it? Because the alternative is worse. Because disobedience would lead to punishment, discomfort, or conflict they want to avoid even more. In other words, they're still choosing. They're choosing the lesser of two evils. And when you find yourself trapped between two evils, what do? You say, I want out of here. And you take the easiest path, the line of least resistance. So, even in that moment, even when it feels like you're doing something you don't want to do, you're still doing what you want. You're choosing comfort over discomfort, safety over danger, peace over conflict. Now, you can pursue this insight more profoundly. Stop thinking about human behavior as something that responds to the compulsion of an environment. Instead, see the behavior of the environment as an essential aspect of you. It's not the environment starting something which you are then compelled to follow. It's the whole system moving together, you and the environment, as one unified process. When you enter a state of liberated or mystical consciousness, you often feel this directly. You walk up a hill, and it feels like the hill is lifting you. The ground heaves beneath your feet, and up you go. You experience a strange sense of lightness, effortlessness, walking on air. There are no obstructions. Nothing is pushing you or forcing you. It all flows together. And in that state, you are perceiving the course of nature as it actually happens without the filter of resistance. But in the ordinary way of living, you've been conditioned to resist it, to fight it, to create a sense of strain. And that strain, that's what you call the ego. The ego, in practice, is a sensation of tension. When you are aware of I, you are aware of a basic discomfort located between the eyes in the solar plexus in various physical centers. It's a constant tightness, a resistance against the flow. And when that tension ceases, you discover immediately that the separate ego has disappeared. And what I refers to is simply the total panorama of experience, everything that's happening. You don't know all of it consciously, because you can't inspect all of it with your conscious attention. That would be absurd. But you know it in a much better way, the way you know how to grow hair, how to digest food, how to open and close your hands. Now, if we accept the notion that everything that happens to us is our own doing, our own karma, we have to be very careful. We have to watch out for the devil of omnipotence, the inflation, the feeling that your ego is what's in control of all this. And there's another trap. If you think that everything that happens to everybody is what they really wanted, you might absolve yourself from any responsibility for being unkind. You might say, well, the unkindness I did to you was what you really wanted, wasn't it? There's a curious sense in which a lot of people go around looking for trouble. Psychologists have pointed out the phenomenon of accident-prone individuals. They seem to be attracting trouble like lights attract moths. And we're all doing that in one way or another. But we manage to remain unconscious of it, so we can keep playing the game of praise and blame. That's not my fault, that's your fault. We go around apportioning faults to everybody. Because if we're going to praise people for good things, we have to also blame them for bad things. Otherwise, praise loses its meaning. If everybody was acting in a praiseworthy way and we praised everyone for everything, they'd get tired of it. They wouldn't even notice it anymore. So as long as you're going to get a kick out of being praised, you've got to go around blaming too. It's very simple. But if you see the folly of that, if you see that praising and blaming are just creating each other, then you stop doing both. You don't praise, you don't blame, you just dig the whole thing. And that's why, when you encounter very great sages, you never hear them blame people, and they very rarely praise anyone. If you try to start gossip in their presence, if you make a derogatory comment about someone, it's as if you've thrown a rock into a well and heard no splash. You get no response, no agreement. And if you praise somebody, there's likely nothing to be said except perhaps some remark that you're praising the beloved in all its manifestations. This disconcerts some people terribly. Real sages never gossip, never criticize persons, because they understand the French saying, to understand all is to forgive all. If you've been a counselor, a psychotherapist, a minister, if you've spent any time dealing with human problems, you soon realize how vastly complicated people are. You see that they're in the messes they're in not because of moral failure, but because that's just the way it is. And you stop blaming people. And because you don't blame people, they come to you. They seek your advice. They don't want to come to someone who will scold them. They want someone who accepts reality as it is. It's like a dentist who simply accepts the fact that people really don't take care of their teeth. That's precisely why he's in business. A good dentist doesn't scold his patients. He just accepts it. Same with doctors. They know perfectly well that nobody's going to live by the rules of health, and the rules themselves are vague and constantly changing. Every generation has a different theory about what's healthy. The diet recommended in 1921 is different from the one in 1930, which is different from the one in 1960. So the function of healers and doctors is just to do what can be done to stop the mess from getting too messy. They must accept it as that. That's their job. If you were healthy, you wouldn't need them. So they're in business because of your problems, not despite them. Now, we have difficulty seeing this mutuality of our relationship to the rest of the world because it's contrary to common sense. It's contrary to the way we've been brought up. And therefore, we have what I would call an intellectual block to understanding it, quite apart from any emotional blocks. But obviously, we must overcome that intellectual block if we're going to go any further and actually realize and feel this way of life working. So the question arises, what do I do? Do I go around saying to myself, all this that's happening to me is what I wanted? I am inside and outside. I am the subjective and the objective. Do I try to talk myself into this way of feeling? Well, that's very superficial, because this new sense of relationship to nature is something much more than an idea. Ecologists and physicists have the idea that this is so, but most of them, in their private lives and in their ordinary human behavior, are just like other people who don't feel it. They might understand quantum mechanics intellectually, but emotionally they still live in a Newtonian billiard ball universe where things push and pull and cause and effect operate in a linear, mechanical way. So there may be a transition from our ordinary way of feeling how things go on to the new way, but we have to do something other than think, because actually thinking is causing the trouble. It is by thinking that we divide the world into separate events and separate things. There's a concept in philosophy called the uncalculated life, a perpetual uncalculated life in the present. You might remember the saying from the Sermon on the Mount, "Be not anxious for tomorrow." The uncalculated life. If God so clothed the grass of the field, will he not much more clothe you, O you of little faith? And I've never met a preacher yet who would really take that up. They all say, well, of course that's too hard a saying for most of us. It's not practical. Everybody has to plan for tomorrow. But here's the thing. At this point, people can go in two directions. There's one class of people who will say, all right, let's live the uncalculated life. Let's not make any plans. And before you know it, they're living in a filthy apartment, bumming around, living on petty thievery. This is the wrong way. The first thing to do is realize that whether you like it or not, whether you know it or not, the relationship between you and the environment is already harmonious. In the same way, you are already living the uncalculated life. You have to find out, first of all, that you're always doing it and that what you call your calculations and plans are just funny little rationalizations. In other words, your ego has about as much control over what goes on as a child sitting next to his father in a car with a plastic steering wheel, thinking he's steering the car. Most of the functions, most of the goings on in you and around you, the circumstances of life have nothing to do with your ego at all. You don't even know why you make up your mind to do certain things. Superficially, you have a few ideas, but they're just rationalizations. It's like when you enter into a marriage, you have really no control over its outcome in the ordinary sense of ego control. You've taken a colossal gamble involving enormous complexes of patterns. And maybe it'll come out all right if you don't interfere with it too much. It's like the physicist Oppenheimer said, it's perfectly obvious that the whole world is going to hell. And the only possible way we might stop that from happening is not to try to prevent it. All these wars are started by people who think they're helping someone who think they're going to make things better. So when you begin not from the basis of saying, I should now live the spontaneous, improvident, non-calculative style of life, but from realizing you've always done that, only you rationalize that you didn't. When you see that you always did what you wanted to do, basically only sometimes you said, it was my duty, because you preferred a conception of yourself as someone who always does his duty that flattered you, and so you were still following your own way. When you see that, you don't think, well, now there is some special thing I have to do to understand this harmonious relationship between the individual and the world. Because if you work on it that way, you'll start from the presupposition that that relationship doesn't already exist and has to be brought into being. The thing is, it doesn't have to be brought into being. It's there. But now, when you see that it's so, it obviously starts to make a difference. You do behave in a different way. But the new kind of behavior that results from a transformation is not forced behavior. When you try to imitate the way a saint behaves, you've made a forced change. And all forced behavior is phony. It's like someone saying, I love you, I love you, I love you, when they don't. They feel they ought to, but they don't really. And there's something that doesn't ring true. Think of the poor Lord, listening to all the prayers of all those people, saying, I love you, Jesus, when he knows they don't. They're just saying it because they think they ought to. It must be very trying. So whenever you make a forced change, you create a split inside yourself. But if the change happens in the same way that a seed, at the proper season, breaks open and sends up a shoot that comes from the whole force of life itself. When you see that without your having to do anything, you are living the uncalculated life, and you're only pretending you're calculating it and arranging it. Then you will have a grasp of the total situation, and it will allow changes in action to occur, changes that are not forced. This is why there is always a trend in every kind of spiritual doctrine which says something about grace, divine grace. There must come about something in you, or a change, which you can't produce. And if you try to produce it, you will be a victim of spiritual pride. But on the other hand, all teachers are saying, you've got to make an effort. There's some discipline. There's something you must do. Well, that's the only way to get it across to people that you, as a separate effort maker, are a myth, a phantasm. Because if you really try to control your mind and only think the thoughts you think are good thoughts, you'll find that you're going around in a circle. There's a character in ancient philosophy who's very good at pointing this out. When people ask him, how do you meditate? He says, why do you want to meditate? Why are you concentrating? Why are you saying prayers? Why do you think you should believe in God? And it always comes up, because I'm selfish. I'm out for my own good, and this seems to be the way. And he says, you see, you don't have any genuine love at all. It's all fake. So you have to find, first of all, where the genuine love is. Now, you love you. You don't doubt that. That's genuine. You won't argue about it. But then when you start from this, I gave a talk some time ago to a group of military researchers, people who make weapons, who do all the strategic planning. They had the nerve to ask us ministers and philosophers what was our basis for moral behavior. And I said, my basis for moral behavior is pure selfishness. I said, I'm talking to realistic people here, and I don't think we need to be sentimental. You're all warriors and fighters. You know how rough things are. So I'm going to say to you frankly, I'm out for me. But of course I don't do it in a tactless way. I don't go around hitting people over the head and saying, give me this, give me that. I'm much more subtle. I use good manners. I say please. I compliment people. And finally they feel massaged psychologically into a state where they'll give. But then I said, there are some things that bother me. The first one is, if I love me, what do I want? And furthermore, who am I? Because if I'm going to be realistic about getting what I want, I've got to be pretty sure what it is that's me, and what is the state of desire in me. If I am desire, if I am a center of desire, what's it all for? I think of all the things I want, but it turns out that none of them are me. I want dinner, but that doesn't mean I'm going to eat me up. If I enjoy any pleasure, I can think of it as the enjoyment of something that I hadn't thought of defining as myself. Of course, I like my sensations. I like what happens to my body when I take a fine wine and drink it. But then what's the difference between my body and the wine? If I say I like the wine, I also mean I like me and the wine together, the mixture. But then I don't eat you or a friend or a lover in the same way I drink wine. I live in association. I like this. But then I'm loving things that aren't formally supposed to be me. And as I go into it, as I investigate what I mean by me, I find that I can't put any limits on it. I cannot experience me without you or without the other. They're inseparable. But you don't find this out until you investigate it, until you really go into the question, what do I want? And that's the most important investigation anyone can make. Now, if you're finding this perspective transformative, if you're beginning to see the ways in which you've been unconsciously creating your own reality, I want to recommend something to you. It's called Beyond the Shadow, A Journey into Carl Jung's Core Psychology. This ebook explores the unconscious forces that shape your desires, your behaviors, and your sense of self, the shadow, the persona, the anima and animus, and the process of individuation. Because understanding that you always get what you want is one thing. Understanding why you want what you want and why you resist what you resist, that's another level entirely. You'll find the link pinned in the comments below. And if you want a 30-day practical guide to applying these insights daily, check out Dialogues with the Unconscious. It's designed to help you navigate the inner work step by step, so you're not just thinking about transformation, but living it. Both are linked below. Grab them if you're serious about this path. So I said to those military men, these people who think they want power, I said some very subversive and undermining things, without anybody knowing it until long after I left. Because the question of power is intimately connected to the question of desire. What do you want? Most people think they want power, control, influence, wealth, status. But if you investigate deeply enough, you find that what you're really wanting is something much more fundamental. You want to be yourself, fully, completely, without resistance. And the irony is, you already are. You're already getting what you want. You're already living the life you're choosing unconsciously, yes, but choosing nonetheless. The only question is, will you become conscious of it? Will you stop pretending that you're a victim of circumstance and start recognizing that you are the circumstance? Will you stop blaming the world for giving you what you didn't ask for and start seeing that you've been asking for it all along, just not with your conscious mind? Because here's the final truth. The world is not happening to you. It's happening as you. You are not a separate entity navigating a hostile environment. You are the environment. You are the process. You are the flow. And when you see that, when you feel that, everything changes. Not because you forced it to change, but because you finally stopped resisting what was always true. So here we are. You always get what you want. Invariably. Even though you may think it's entirely opposed to your wishes, it's your karma. It's what's going out from you, returning to you. And the moment you stop defining yourself as just your conscious, voluntary behavior, the moment you expand your sense of self to include the unconscious, the environment, the totality, you begin to see the harmony that was always there. You don't have to create it. You don't have to force it. You just have to stop resisting it. And when you do, you'll feel the hill lifting you as you walk. You'll feel the ground heaving beneath your feet, carrying you forward. You'll experience the strange lightness, the effortlessness, the sense that there are no obstructions anywhere. Because there aren't. There's only the flow, the dance, the movement of the whole. And you are that, not the separate ego, straining and resisting, but the total panorama, the uncalculated life, the perpetual present. So stop pretending you're in control. Stop pretending you're separate, and start recognizing what you've always been. The inside and the outside, the subjective and the objective, the desire and the fulfillment, all of it, always. I'll see you in the next one.